Thank you very much for having me, Glenn.
So the U.S. war on Iran, it seems to only get more intense, and also it's widening. But the last time we spoke, we discussed what the escalation ladder might look like. That is, you mentioned that Yemen will likely play a greater role in this war in response to the U.S. escalations, for example, shutting down the Red Sea. And well, since then, we see in Yemen do some profound strikes on Saudi Arabia, more specifically hitting its Aramco oil facilities. And we see now the Saudis, again, seems to increase their backing of its side in Yemen to fight against, well, who we in the West call the Houthis. But what is it that's happening now, and where do you see this headed?
Well, there seems to be a bit of a strange turn of events because the United States for the last couple of nights has not attacked Iran. And all is quiet on the Hormuz front. Of course, the Iranians continue to shut the Hormuz for ships affiliated to Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar. And of course, they are all U.S. allies. And a ship was targeted by the Iranians, a ship which violated Iran's naval orders. And this was the second ship that Iran struck yesterday, since Trump declared that every time from now on that a ship is struck, the United States will take out a bridge or a power plant. But two ships have been struck so far, and Trump has not done anything yet. Some people were speculating that Trump would attack on Friday after the markets close, but here we are on Sunday, and so far nothing. That doesn't mean we won't have war, but I think it is an indication that the United States does recognize the seriousness of the situation, most probably at least, and that the Iranians are not going to be intimidated or they're not going to back down, which is something that they should have known anyway, because during the 40 days of war that we had, Trump said he's going to, back then, he's going to annihilate Iran. He's going to obliterate Iran. He's going to take it back to the Stone Age. He's going to wipe out a civilization, but it didn't change Iran's military posture or its policy with regards to the Strait of Hormuz and the region. So now, for whatever reason, I don't know obviously what goes on in Trump's head, but it's been 2 days of quiet. On the other hand, the Yemeni armed forces, Ansarullah, or as they're called in the West, the Houthis, which is not a correct term, but in any case, they did the smart thing. As the Strait of Hormuz is closed, when the Strait of Hormuz is closed, the Red Sea obviously becomes much more important, because part of the oil that was exported through the Strait of Hormuz is now going through the Red Sea. It's more expensive for the Saudis to pump it there, but still they're able to export, by some estimates, 4 to 4.5 million barrels of oil a day. Sometimes a bit less than 4 million barrels, sometimes maybe a bit more than 4.5, but it seems like 4.5 million barrels a day have been exported. So that helps the United States and the West in managing the situation to a degree. And of course, it helps the Saudi regime survive, because it can't export from the Persian Gulf. It can't export other goods from the Persian Gulf. It can't trade through the Persian Gulf. So it becomes extremely dependent on the Red Sea. So that makes this the opportune moment for Ansarullah to put pressure on the Saudis. Now, why would they want to put pressure on the Saudis? Because the Saudis have imposed a siege on Yemen for well over a decade. They imposed a genocidal war on Yemen with the support of the West, with the support of the region. They imposed starvation back then in 2015 and 16. The countries in the region, they all supported it. And even Qatar and Turkey, before the siege on Qatar, they were also part of this. And then of course, after the siege, they tilted away. The West supported it, Australia. There were thousands of British advisors helping keep the Saudi Air Force flying and active to bomb cities. They bombed funerals, they bombed schools, they carried out a genocide. Hundreds of thousands of people died, many of starvation, and the U.S. blockaded the Red Sea. Even U.S. naval ships would block food from coming in. A senior U.S. official once said that he was on a ship, a military naval ship, and they stopped a boat that was smuggling in medicine to Yemen, and they went and dumped it all in the sea. That's what this coalition was doing to Yemen. Back then, so that siege continues even until today, to a lesser degree, but still very brutal and barbaric. But gradually during that siege and that warfare, the Yemenis began to build their own drone and missile capabilities. Obviously with the help of Iran, but Yemen has lots of smart people, lots of engineers, lots of educated people, universities. So they began to develop this capability. And then finally, the Yemenis were able to strike very hard at Saudi oil installation. And that caused the Saudis to accept a ceasefire. Now, the siege has not been lifted. And recently, the Saudis made a very foolish move. And that was that Iran broke the siege by air by sending a passenger plane to Yemen to pick up a delegation for the funeral of Ayatollah Khamenei. Of course, it was more than just for picking up people at the funeral. It was symbolic. They were breaking the siege. And the Saudi Air Force tried to approach the airport. Apparently, anti-aircraft defenses prevented it. The Iranians brought the delegation to Iran. When they were traveling back, the Saudis bombed the airport. Obviously, they wanted to prevent the siege from being broken, because if planes keep going, then obviously that's the first step in breaking the siege. But this, I think, was a major mistake, especially coming at a time when the Strait of Hormuz is closed. So, of course, Iran was outraged because the crew on that plane were just ordinary men and women. It was a passenger plane. And Yemen, of course, they were outraged. It was an act of war. So they struck back, and then the Saudis struck Al-Hodeidah. And we saw what Yemen did the night before last night. So that created huge damage to the Saudi oil infrastructure. And it sends a message both to the Saudis and to the United States about the future of the oil market if this war continues. So you see that the axis of resistance is working collectively, but also Yemen is working because this is the best opportunity for Yemen to break the siege, because the Americans, and they need that oil. And what is interesting is that, and I'm not sure about the details, but as far as I know, the Yemenis did not focus on blocking the oil exports. They did lots of damage to very key facilities. But if I'm not mistaken, the Saudis can still export oil, whereas the Yemenis could have destroyed the port and just blocked oil exports. But, and this is just my personal interpretation, it may be wrong, but I think they didn't do it because they've closed the Red Sea effectively to Saudi ships. Already they've hit 3 ships to teach the Saudis to take them seriously. And I think basically the reason why they didn't destroy their ability to export oil and instead have just blocked the exports themselves is so that the Saudis would have an incentive to back down and to have their exports restart. In other words, if Yemen had just destroyed Saudi exports, that would have been, of course, a catastrophic blow to Mohammed bin Salman. But here, the Yemenis are basically, in my opinion, saying that, look, you stop this siege, you stop killing our kids, you stop starving our people, and you can export your oil. But look at what we can do to you. We look at what we've done to your other facilities, how we've devastated them. And they'll be, many months before they can work. And this, apparently, some of these facilities are among the most advanced in the world. So, like Iran, you can see that Yemen and Iran are behaving in the same manner. The Iranians, they can destroy Qatar's gas installations. And believe me, many Iranians want the Iranian government to do this. They just want the Iranian government to wipe it out because of, after all they've done to Iran or Saudi and so. But the Iranian government isn't doing that. They want to preserve the infrastructure in this region. They want the region to go back to normal, but without U.S. hegemony and U.S. Domination and constant U.S. threats. So when the United States threatens to destroy Iranian vital, critical structures, the Iranians say that we're going to destroy the critical infrastructure in these regimes that have facilitated this war. But they're not going to escalate themselves first. So they want to keep that incentive. They want to keep this incentive for the United States to refrain from escalation, and for the regimes in the region to put pressure on the United States in order for it to refrain from escalating. But in any case, all this aside, simultaneously, the Saudis are being targeted, the Red Sea is shut for Saudi oil, and the Strait of Hormuz is shut. And it's been 2 days since Trump or his armed forces have stopped attacking Iran, and they have not attacked Yemen either during this period.
Well, I guess that's the logic of the escalation ladder as well, not to go all out in a all-out war, because that would essentially put the Saudis as well all in if everything is being attacked. So it's that ability to escalate further. This is what usually imposes restraint on the opponent. That is showing you're able to destroy the targets, but leaving out the more critical targets, to give the opponent a chance to change its position. But if we would then put ourselves in the shoes of the Saudis, what kind of how does it look like for them? What are their options now? And I'm assuming that the Americans are putting pressure on them to assist in this war, because the Americans seem to be fighting this alone. Even the Israelis are sitting this one out, which is interesting. I see Iran is not striking the Israelis, but the Israelis are not striking Iran either. So how do you see the world from eyes of the Saudis, as well as the Israelis for that matter? Because they have limited options now as well.
Well, first of all, I think the attack from Yemen was probably a major surprise, because the quality of the attack was very high. And obviously the technological advancements made by the Yemeni armed forces and Ansarullah are very substantial. And we have not heard of any success or major success in downing the missiles and drones and cruise missiles. They themselves have said they fired dozens. So their arsenal is very substantial. On the other hand, the Iranian arsenal is enormous. We've discussed this before. The Iranians have been preparing themselves for this war for decades. They've been producing missiles and drones for a very, very long time, and they continue to produce them now. And the Iranians can go on with this for a very, very long time. Throughout the next year, the Americans will run out of military hardware or missiles and air defense systems far before the Iranians. But now that you look at Yemen alongside Iran and its capabilities, it's because I think if I was a Saudi, I'd be terrified, because on the one hand, you have Yemen, which can tolerate, its threshold for pain is very high. It can tolerate huge amounts of pain. It survived the genocidal war. It was treated like Gaza for years. But the difference is that in the case of Gaza, the Palestinian people had huge amounts of sympathy. And in the case of Yemen, there wasn't that much sympathy. It was largely ignored. So, but they persevered. They won. And to their enormous credit, extraordinary, the morality of these people, when Gaza was being, when the genocide in Gaza began, they shut the Red Sea to put pressure on the Israeli regime to bring an end to the genocide, despite all the hardship that they'd been through, and despite the fact that, except for Iran and the axis of resistance, there was very little sympathy for them across the region, even on the streets. So now you see that the Iranians and Yemen, they can tolerate a great deal of pain. The Iranian economy is not nearly as dependent on oil or gas as the Saudis. It is dependent. It is huge in Iran. But Iran has agriculture. It has its own, it has industries, but it doesn't depend on oil or gas exports like the Saudis do. The Saudi economy is an oil economy. And if that is just shut down for a few months, the Saudis are in serious trouble. They have nothing but oil. They have hundreds of millions of dollars worth of shares and assets and in the United States, so which, but I'm not sure if the Americans will allow them to withdraw a substantial amount of money. They and the Emiratis and others to sell their bonds or their shares to make up with, because that would be hundreds of billions of dollars if they actually did that. So the Saudis are in a very difficult situation, and as I said, the Iranians and Yemen can tolerate a lot more pain than they can. But then again, the fact that the Saudis bombed the airport and started this with Yemen, I think was a very irrational decision to take. I've heard from a couple of people who normally are well informed that the Americans pushed the Saudis to do this. But even if the Americans, if it doesn't matter if it was the Americans or the Saudis, it was a foolish act, because it has made the Saudi regime much more vulnerable. If I was this Saudi and the Iranians had sent a plane, I would not have struck the airport, even though I know that the Iranians would probably send in more planes, and every week or so they'd send another plane, or maybe 2 a week gradually. But I still wouldn't risk starting a war with Yemen when the Strait of Hormuz is closed. So I think this puts the Saudis in a much more difficult position. But more importantly, I think it puts Trump in a very difficult position, because during after the 40-day war and the 2 months or so of siege warfare, where the United States obviously lost, Trump signed the MOU, and his justification was that we only have 4 weeks of energy resources or oil left in our reserves. Now, how accurate that is, I don't know. But in any case, there is a problem. There's a serious problem. The Strait of Hormuz was open for a couple of weeks, normalized for a couple of weeks, but it's been closed now for over 2 weeks again. And by shutting down the Red Sea and threatening Saudi installations, the pace in which the shortages increase has risen. And that, I think, puts Trump in a much more dangerous situation.
Yeah, I was gonna say the problems they had, be it the oil shortage, the global economy going off a cliff, or what's becoming